entire country was watching the Super Bowl. Nearly 90 million people were glued to their TVs. But while America celebrated touchdowns and halftime shows, an 11-year-old girl was vanishing in broad daylight. And what makes this case so terrifying is that her kidnapping was actually caught on camera. For a few seconds, surveillance footage showed a man casually walking up to a little girl beside a car wash, grabbing her arm and leading her away forever. No mask, no panic, no hesitation, just pure confidence, like he had done something like this before. At first, police thought they were dealing with a normal missing child case. Then they watched the footage again and again. And suddenly investigators realized something horrifying. The man in the video wasn't a stranger hiding in shadows. He was living openly in the community with a criminal record, a family, and a past so disturbing that once detectives identified him, they knew Carly Brucia was in unimaginable danger. On February 1, 2004, most of America was distracted. The Super Bowl had completely taken over the country. Bars were packed. Families crowded around televisions. Nearly 90 million people watched the New England Patriots face the Carolina Panthers in one of the biggest broadcasts in television history. But while millions were celebrating touchdowns and halftime performances, an 11-year-old girl in Sarasota, Florida, was disappearing. And within days, her case would horrify the entire country. Carly Brucia was exactly the kind of kid people instantly loved. Friends described her as energetic, affectionate, and impossible not to smile around. She loved music, shopping, sports, and constantly hugged people she cared about. Teachers called her sweet and charming. Her school principal later described her as a shining light. She was only 11 years old, and on Super Bowl Sunday she was supposed to be doing something completely normal. Going home to watch football with her family. The day before, Carly had stayed over at a friend's house. The next evening, around 6:15 p.m., she left to head home. It was only about a mile away, but there was one problem. Her mother, Susan, never wanted her walking home alone near Bee Ridge Road. The roads were busy, traffic moved fast, and Susan specifically told the other parent she did not want Carly making that walk by herself. So Carly's stepfather, Stephen, got in the car to pick her up. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The streets were relatively quiet because most families were already inside watching the Super Bowl. But as Stephen drove around searching for Carly, panic slowly started setting in. She wasn't there, not near the road, not near the intersection, nowhere. And according to Stephen, he immediately knew something was wrong because Carly always checked in with her family. She wasn't the type of child to disappear without telling someone where she was going. An hour later, the family called 911, and the desperation in that call still hits hard today. "My daughter is missing," Susan told dispatchers. "She's gone." Police responded immediately. Officers flooded the neighborhood, knocking on doors and speaking with Carly's friends. Detectives learned she had been upset the previous day after tension at home involving her mother and stepfather. She had reportedly wanted to leave earlier because she missed her mother. At first, investigators still hoped this might be a runaway situation. Maybe she was hiding nearby. Maybe she went to another friend's house. Maybe she was scared. But then the next morning came, and Carly never showed up at school. That's when investigators realized this situation was becoming every parent's nightmare. Mitch dogs were brought in. One bloodhound named Ruby picked up Carly's scent using a pillowcase from her bedroom and followed the trail through Sarasota neighborhoods until it suddenly stopped behind a local business, a car wash called E's Car Wash. That single location changed the entire case because the owner told detectives something extremely important. The property had surveillance cameras. Police immediately pulled the footage. At first, nothing stood out. One camera showed traffic moving normally, another showed an empty parking lot. But then detectives reviewed footage from a motion-activated camera positioned behind the car wash, and suddenly, there she was. Carly appeared on screen wearing exactly what witnesses described earlier that evening: a red shirt, blue jeans, a pink backpack. She looked completely normal, completely unaware that her life was about to end. Then another figure entered the frame. A man about 5'8", dark hair, a tattoo on his arm, wearing what looked like a mechanic's work uniform. The two spoke briefly, then the man grabbed Carly by the arm and calmly led her away. That was it, just seconds of footage. but it instantly became one of the most disturbing child abduction videos in America because, unlike most kidnappings, this one had been captured almost entirely in real time. And the worst part? The man didn't look panicked, he didn't rush. He didn't seem afraid anyone would stop him. He moved with terrifying confidence, as if he already knew nobody was going to intervene. Investigators immediately released still images from the footage to the public, hoping someone would recognize the suspect. Meanwhile, they aggressively ruled out potential suspects close to Carly. Her stepfather, Stephen, was questioned extensively. Phone records and timelines eventually cleared him completely. Then Stephen mentioned something critical. While driving around searching for Carly that night, he noticed a pale yellow station wagon repeatedly moving around the area near the car wash. That detail suddenly mattered a lot, because when detectives rewound the surveillance footage carefully, they spotted it too. A pale yellow Buick station wagon entered the parking lot shortly before Carly disappeared. Now investigators had two things: the suspect's face and the suspect vehicle. Suddenly, the investigation exploded. Flyers covered Sarasota. Volunteers joined massive search efforts. News stations repeatedly aired the surveillance video across Florida. And somewhere out there, man in the footage was watching all of it unfold. Then came the breakthrough. A woman watching the news froze when she saw the video. The walk, the posture, the uniform. She recognized him instantly. Not because she barely knew him, because she had actually worked with him before. She called her husband into the room. He recognized him too, and together they gave detectives a name: Joseph Smith. The moment investigators heard it, everything started moving fast, because Joseph Smith already had a disturbing criminal history: drug arrests, probation violations, prior accusations involving kidnapping and false imprisonment. And perhaps most horrifying of all, he had recently violated probation again but was still free on the streets. Detectives rushed to his residence alongside probation officers. When Joseph finally stepped outside to speak with them, officers immediately noticed something chilling. He looked exactly like the man in the surveillance footage: same build, same walk, same uniform, same tattoos. But when detectives showed him the image from the car wash, Joseph calmly said, "That looks like me, but it's not me." And for a moment, investigators worried they still didn't have enough evidence to hold him for Carly's disappearance. Then things got even stranger, because while searching his room, detectives found the same type of mechanic-style uniform seen in the video. But that alone wasn't enough, and then another problem appeared. Joseph technically had an alibi. At least, that's what investigators thought. Until one witness suddenly changed everything. The witness who changed everything was the owner of the yellow Buick station wagon, and his statement completely destroyed Joseph Smith's alibi. At first, the man's wife had told police Joseph was home around the time Carly disappeared. That statement temporarily gave detectives a problem, because if Joseph wasn't near the car wash at 6:21 p.m., the entire case suddenly became more complicated. But hours later, her husband walked into the police station and corrected the story. Joseph had borrowed the Buick that evening, and according to him, Joseph was gone far longer than he originally claimed. That detail terrified investigators, because now the timeline matched perfectly. The yellow station wagon seen near the car wash was being driven by Joseph Smith. Meanwhile, forensic teams searched the vehicle inch by inch, and detectives noticed something disturbing almost immediately. The back seat had been folded down. Items inside the car had clearly been moved around. It looked like something had happened in that vehicle, and now investigators knew they were running out of time. At this point, Carly had already been missing for days. Every hour mattered, but Joseph refused to confess. Even after detectives confronted him with surveillance footage and inconsistencies in his story, he stayed calm. He denied being at the car wash, denied abducting Carly, denied everything. Then investigators made another breakthrough. Joseph's own brother, John Smith, began suspecting him too. And honestly, that's one of the darkest parts of this entire case. Imagine watching the surveillance footage of a little girl being kidnapped and slowly realizing the man on screen might actually be your own brother. John later told investigators the way Joseph walked was unmistakable. Years earlier, Joseph had undergone back surgery, changing his gait permanently. The walk in the footage matched perfectly. Then John revealed even more disturbing behavior. The night Carly disappeared, Joseph allegedly showed up at his house acting strangely. He looked nervous, almost euphoric, and according to John, he was wearing unfamiliar boots instead of his normal sneakers. The next morning at work, Joseph repeatedly washed his hands even though they were already clean, over and over and over again. That image haunted investigators later because it sounded exactly like someone psychologically unraveling after committing something horrific. Then came the moment that finally broke the case open. Joseph privately spoke with his brother and mother inside the police station. At first, John walked out claiming Joseph hadn't confessed to anything, but later that night, John suddenly called investigators, again sounding panicked, and agents instantly realized something terrifying. Joseph had told him where Carly's body was. 3 officers rushed out with John into the darkness near a church off Proctor Road. It was after 1:00 in the morning when they reached a brush-covered field behind the church property. Then investigators saw her. Carly Brucia's body was lying hidden in the tall grass. She was partially unclothed. One sock still remained on her foot. There were clear signs she had been restrained and strangled. The search that had consumed Sarasota for days was over, and every officer at that scene knew they were looking at one of the most heartbreaking crimes imaginable. Later, John admitted Joseph had nearly confessed directly. According to him, Joseph became emotional and said, "I'm sorry for what I did." But even then, Joseph reportedly struggled to say the actual words out loud, almost like he was trying to mentally separate himself from the horror of what he had done. Eventually, the forensic evidence erased any remaining doubt. Joseph's DNA was found on Carly's clothing. Fibers from the Buick matched fibers on her shirt. Her hairs were discovered inside the vehicle, and investigators learned Joseph had dumped her backpack and clothing into different dumpsters trying to destroy evidence: the surveillance footage, the station wagon, the DNA, the body location. Everything pointed directly to him. The case devastated Sarasota. Pancreans became terrified to let children walk alone even short distances. Schools opened counseling services for students and families overwhelmed by grief and fear. Meanwhile, Carly's memorial grew larger every day: flowers, stuffed animals, handwritten messages, candles, an entire community mourning an 11-year-old girl whose life ended in unimaginable terror. During sentencing, the judge described Carly's final moments in chilling detail, saying she likely understood the hopelessness of her situation from the moment Joseph grabbed her arm beside the car wash. That image, the footage of her being led away, became permanently burned into America's memory. And honestly, it still is, because unlike many cases where the victim simply vanishes, people actually watch the abduction happen. That's what makes this story so uniquely disturbing. The crime was captured in front of us, and still, nobody could stop it in time. Joseph Smith was convicted of kidnapping, sexual assault, and first-degree murder. The jury recommended the death penalty by a 10-2 vote, and the judge officially sentenced him to death. But the legal battle didn't end there. Years later, changes in Florida death penalty laws led to appeals and resentencing hearings after courts ruled death sentences required unanimous jury decisions. For Carly's family, the endless appeals became emotionally exhausting. Her father later said the criminal justice system had failed his daughter long before the murder even happened, because Joseph had repeatedly violated probation conditions but was allowed to remain free. That anger eventually inspired proposed legislation called Carly's Law, aimed at strengthening supervision for repeat offenders and protecting children from violent criminals. But despite public support and emotional speeches, the law was never fully passed. Meanwhile, Joseph Smith remained on death row for years until 2021, when he died from illness before his resentencing process could fully conclude. No execution, no final courtroom ending, just death inside a prison cell. And for many people connected to the case, that outcome felt deeply unsatisfying, because nothing about Carly's story ever truly felt fair. Not the kidnapping, not the murder, not the years of appeals afterward. But even now, decades later, Carly Brucia's name continues to matter. Her memorial still stands, her story is still taught in child safety programs, and that horrifying surveillance footage still reminds parents everywhere how quickly ordinary moments can turn into nightmares. An 11-year-old girl walking home to watch the Super Bowl with her family. That's all this was supposed to be. Instead, it became one of the most chilling child abduction cases America has ever seen. If this case affected you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more true crime documentaries that uncover the darkest real stories behind the headlines. And tell me in the comments, do you think criminals with repeated violent offenses should ever be released back into society after